everybody, we are baking today. These quarantine days, everybody wants to be in the kitchen baking bread apparently, because this little packet of gold has been really hard to come by. Hey there, welcome back to my kitchen. I'm Elizabeth Hines from Our Paleo Family and the Autoimmune Free Cooking Club. And we're not doing Instant Pot today, we're baking. Everybody seems to want to be baking these days, which I do too. And I have been searching for a really great tasting, easy to put together gluten-free yeast bread recipe for a long time. I think I have found one, and I am going to share it with you today. And it is really easy, and it just uses paleo pantry staples, and actually not even paleo, but just gluten-free, and just a couple little special things. And so we'll go through all of our ingredients. I'm already floury and my bowl is already dirty because I had to make up a new batch of my gluten-free flour. So all of these recipes that I share with you on my YouTube channel, I'm making them right here in front of your eyes so you can write down the amounts. Or you can go to my website, which is autoimmunefreecookingclub.com, and I have some recipes there for free. And then there is a recipe-only membership. It's $9.99 a month. You get access to my hundreds of gluten-free, dairy-free, mostly paleo recipes. Or like I said, you can just pay attention. So instead of writing a cookbook and making you buy a cookbook, I give a membership to my website, which is always expanding. Every single week I post a new recipe, sometimes two. Often there is an associated video with step-by-step instructions like you're getting to see here. So it's really a great deal to pay this $9.99 a month, and you can pay it one time, and you can go on and just print off or download tons of recipes and then cancel. So those are your options for getting a printable version of this recipe. So I want to start by spraying 2 standard size loaf pans. Let me show you another one. This recipe will make 2 loaves of bread, which is awesome because you either can feed a large family or a lot of people that like bread, or you can freeze one for later. So some loaf pans are like this, and this one doesn't have the markings on them. Sometimes they have the measurements. Do you see how different these are? These are supposedly both standard loaf pans, but this one's much wider, and I don't want that one. I want a taller loaf. So I have these 2, and they're different. One's glass, one's metal, but they're approximately the same size, and they are going to give me 2 nice high loaves of bread. So I'm just going to spray them with some avocado oil spray. You could just grease them with, I'm not going to encourage you to use any sort of inflammatory oil like canola oil or vegetable oil, corn oil, those sorts of things. But any version of avocado, coconut, butter, ghee, those are the oils I would recommend. You could even use a light olive oil. So then I'm going to put my dry ingredients in. So again, on the website, I have a recipe for gluten-free all-purpose flour, and it is a mix that I have come up with, and I've created some recipes that use that flour mix. But I've also used this particular flour mix successfully in many, many gluten-free recipes I've found on the internet. The difference with my recipe and the gluten-free flours you can find in the store is those always have gums in them. I've never found one that didn't contain xanthan gum or bean locust gum or some different kinds of gums. It's almost always xanthan gum because that's how the food manufacturers can make a gluten-free product remotely resemble a standard product. You need gluten with bread to hold it together. You need that protein. So my gluten-free flour mix does not contain any gums at all. It's white rice flour, potato starch, sorghum flour, arrowroot starch, and gelatin, collagen, the kind of collagen that gels. And so that is my secret. So you need 2.5 cups of all-purpose gluten-free flour, and I know that different flours work differently in different recipes. And so you might have some Bob's Red Mill gluten-free flour mix at your house, and you try that with this, and you may not get exactly the same results. The results should be similar, but for your results to be the same as mine, you need to make my flour recipe. Any gluten-free all-purpose flour should work, but you might have just slight differences. Maybe your bread will rise a little bit more. Maybe your bread will not rise quite as much. Okay, so we need 2.5 cups of the flour. We need 1 teaspoon of baking powder. Make sure it's a gluten-free baking powder. 3 teaspoons of psyllium husk. I can link to this one because I bought it from Amazon. Maybe I got it from Thrive, but I know they have it on Amazon. So this is going to help replace the gluten. It's a fiber supplement. People take it that way. It in a very small, like if you're making just like a teeny tiny amount of something and added your psyllium husk, you might taste it. It might add sort of a nutty flavor. But in this recipe of bread, I'm not going to taste it at all. But it will help bind it together. I have 1 pack of active dry yeast. And y'all, this yeast, it's not expired. It doesn't expire until next year. But I did buy it several months ago. I mean, way before all this coronavirus stuff started. And I found it when I was organizing one of my cupboards. And I was so thankful because then it let me bake a loaf of bread. So I'm just going to whisk my dry ingredients together, okay? And then I'm going to start adding my my liquids. And I need 1/4, so I have a 1.5 cups of warm water, which is just warm tap water. And I need a 1/4 cup of, you can use a light olive oil, or this is avocado oil. That's a 1/4 cup of that. And then a 1/4 cup of honey. You could use maple syrup if you prefer, which I usually do. But in this recipe, the honey, I didn't really taste the honey because of the yeast flavor. So I was good with using the honey. That's just a local raw honey. Get all of that yumminess in there. And we need a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar. And then I'm going to whisk all this together for about a minute. You could get out your stand mixer and use not your dough hook, just a regular mixing paddle, or you could use a hand mixer. But this bread dough is going to be like a batter consistency. It's not going to be thick like a traditional bread dough, so it is not difficult to mix it by hand. I do like to use a really big mixing bowl, bigger than I really need for the quantity of food that's in it. It just gives me the space to really work and hopefully not slop all my ingredients out. Now I've been having to force myself to do weight training exercises, strength classes. I'm using the Peloton app. If you want to follow me on the Peloton app, I'm Our Paleo Family over there. So you can follow people and like join them virtually in class. But I've been making myself do strength exercises because I would much rather just ride the stationary bike or, you know, do a cardio. Just like when my Y is open, I have to make myself go to the strength classes at the Y. But I'm so sore. I just did one yesterday. So maybe I should have gotten out my mixer. But no. I did it. You saw me do that, right? So, and then we add our last 2 ingredients, which is a teaspoon of salt and 3 egg whites from large eggs. It really should be room temperature, and those are really cold. So I'm going to just get really hot tap water in here and set my eggs in there for just a minute. So this is not, I'm not whipping my egg whites. I don't need them. So I didn't need to be really careful that I didn't get any yolk in there. And I don't know if you've just ever noticed through the years in your cooking experience, the fresher an egg, the harder it is to separate the yolk from the white. And I was, we had scrambled eggs for dinner one night this week, And so I added 3 extra yolks with my eggs and saved the whites, knowing I was going to be making this bread. And I got a little bit of, one of the yolks broke and a little bit got in there, but it's totally fine for this recipe. In fact, I have a paleo bread recipe that's also on my website. So this is not paleo because paleo is grain free. And so gluten free, like a gluten-free product you're going to buy at the store, is not going to be paleo, because almost guaranteed they're using rice flour or potato flour, that kind of thing, which a potato is not a grain, but the rice is, obviously, and most of them use rice flour, either white rice or brown rice flour. So this is gluten-free because there's rice flour and sorghum in the flour mix. So my paleo bread recipe is different because it is grain-free, and it uses almond flour, and off the top of my head I can't remember the other flour that's in it, but it uses whole eggs, and it's a delicious bread, and it's a little more of a cakey texture, whereas this is going to have more of a springy, classic white bread texture to it, which you just can't get that with a paleo recipe. I prefer the paleo bread. It's a richer flavor. It's not a yeast bread, but this one is very good. My family loves it. It gets this beautiful crust on top. So after we get this mixed up, I'm going to let the bread rise for just about a half an hour. You need to keep an eye on it because it will rise, and just overflow your pan. So don't let it overflow your pan, because then it's going to rise more in the oven. So I turned my oven on 350. My bread is going to bake at 350, but I just turned it on, let it heat up. It got to 275 maybe, and then I turned it off, and that just let some of the heat from the oven vent out the back of my stove. I hope you know what I mean. And so then it'll be warm on the back of my stove, and that's where I'll let my bread rise. I'm going to dump this water out. So that just took the chill off my egg whites. The whole point is that I didn't want to add ice cold egg whites because that would hinder my yeast. And if you wanted to be super specific and a really good food scientist, bread scientist, you would take the temperature of your water, not just take my word for it and use warm water. But I've had great success just running warm tap water, and it's to the point where it's not burning my hand. My tap water doesn't get that hot anyway, but it's it's beyond tepid. It's warm. Okay, so here's our dough. It's thick. It's pretty thin. You could not knead that if you wanted to. Okay, and I'm just going to divide it between my 2 pans. The recipe that mine is based off of actually used about these same quantities of things, had some of the gums and stuff in it, which I don't like to use because they're not good for your gut. But it said, this makes 1 loaf of bread, and it just rose so much. I ended up losing half of it because it overflowed. It went all down in my burners. Then my burner wouldn't light. It was a huge mess. And I thought, that's going to make 2 loaves of bread. This glass bowl is very heavy. Oh! So that seems like not much. That's going to make a nice loaf of bread. I'm trying to get it all, Guys, these food's expensive, period. But gluten-free ingredients are expensive, and it's precious. That yeast is precious. There have been any at the store, it would have been like a fight for Cabbage Patch dolls back in the 80s. There is none of that stuff in the store, so I don't want to lose any. So I'm just spreading it out. It's going to kind of spread itself because it's thin enough, but I'm helping it a teeny bit. I love this Williams-Sonoma apron because it's so thick I can use it as a towel. Just wipe my hands. So I'm just going to lightly spray the tops. They're not going to rise to the top of, they're not going to touch the plastic. But just in case I fall asleep or something and don't get back here and they rise really big. So I'm covering and setting on the back of my stove, just where it's warm. And then I'm actually going to put a tea towel, a clean towel, over top of them as well, just to kind of insulate. Y'all, as soon as I brought this package of plastic wrap home from the store, I opened it and the cutter thing just ripped right off the box. So I do know how to cut plastic wrap. My box is defective. Okay, so they're going to take a little nap for a half an hour, and I will show them to you after they rise. Okay, everybody, so please pardon the mess. I'm mid creating another recipe here. But I've had my bread rising for close to an hour. So in the past when I've made it, I've only let it rise for 30 minutes, and that was plenty of time. So I guess it's just not as warm in my kitchen today. But I wanted you to see, it's not that it just rose, which you can see really well from this one. I got it on my thumb. But it is bubbly here, and this is just what I want. It's about a ½ inch from the top of my pan, both of them. And these are going in the oven right now for about 30 minutes. 350 oven for 30 minutes. Okay, it is almost bread time. So my 2 loaves baked for 30 minutes. This one was right at 30, and this one went for 32. And I wanted to take their temperature. That's really the most accurate way to, make sure your bread is done. 205 to 210. This is a simple, inexpensive instant read thermometer, and I'll link to one of those down in the notes. You want to let your bread cool in the pan for just about 10 minutes, and then take it out to cool completely on a cooling rack. And both of these loaves I can see have a little depression in the middle, which is interesting. Hasn't done that before. So I don't know if this yeast was different, if it's the humidity, temperature. Also didn't have it stick to the pan like this before. That's the thing with cooking, baking. You just never know. You might follow the instructions exactly the same way and get different results. This pan is really hot. And this bread is really sticking. Whew. I want it to come out in a nice full loaf. I don't want it to be ripped. But I do love it, actually, when things don't go exactly according to plan, because then I can show you that. So I'm going to leave that one in there because it's just sticking, and I'll let it cool, and then I'll just slice it in there. I'll be able to get it out. This one is coming out much more easily. There we go. So I hope you can see. My cameraman will zoom in for me. Like a paleo loaf, of course you can't feel this, but a paleo loaf is real heavy. This one is nice and light. It has this beautiful crust on it. When I've made it before, it's had a dome on the top, which looks beautiful. But it has this nice, I didn't put anything on the top, but it has like a nice shiny crust on top. I always love the end pieces of extra crust. You should really let the bread cool completely before you slice it, but I just want to go ahead and show it to you. Slice easier on a cutting board, of course. But how it's just a nice light, you have this nice open structure. It's an airy white bread, yeasted, and so it has that wonderful yeast flavor. Tastes really good. Nothing fancy. Nothing fancy. It's just good. It's just a good loaf of gluten-free bread. Like I said, it holds together well. It's so good toasted. It makes really, really yummy toast, French toast. And you get 2 loaves. If you had a really big loaf pan, you could just make one nice big tall loaf, but I don't. And so I make these 2 slightly shorter loaves. And again, in the past, it has had a nice little dome on the top. This one sunk in. I'm sure there's a baking expert out there that can tell me why that happened, and let us all know. But what I know is I have a really good tasting gluten-free yeast bread that everybody loves. And it is made with my homemade or my own blend of gluten-free flours. There are no gums to upset my stomach. And I can eat this for a real treat and feel great afterwards. So there you have it. So there you have it, a gluten-free yeast bread if you are in the mood to bake and you can find baking ingredients, especially yeast. I hope you'll give this a try. Let me know what you think. Consider subscribing at autoimmunefreecooking.com, and I would love to have you as a part of my membership community. But thanks for watching. Consider subscribing if you haven't done that already.